Gabriella Ormond wasn't watching where she was going when she barreled straight into a wall of a man, literally. "Oh my God, I'm so sore." She stopped mid-apology when she looked up into a pair of intense blue eyes, the kind that belonged on a movie poster or a billboard in Times Square. The man steadied her with both hands on her arms. "You okay?" His voice was low, calm, and expensive sounding if voices could wear Italian suits. Gabriella blinked, stunned, then nodded. "Yeah, just wasn't looking." He let go, but his gaze lingered a second longer than necessary. Then, with a slight nod, he stepped past her and disappeared into the elevator, the doors closing behind him before she could process what had just happened. "Who was that?" she mumbled under her breath as she adjusted the portfolio in her arms and continued toward the marketing floor of Prescott Enterprises. "You mean the man you just shoulder-checked like you were in an NFL game?" her cubicle mate, Talia, whispered as she dropped into her chair. "That was Sebastian Prescott." Gabriella almost choked. "Prescott as in CEO, billionaire. The man whose name is on every building in this city." "Yep, that's the one." Her stomach flipped. Great. Day one as a junior brand designer, and she'd already physically assaulted the boss. But the rest of the day passed without any sign of Sebastian Prescott. She kept her head down, working through logo drafts and mood boards, trying not to think about how his hands had felt on her arms. Firm, warm, unexpectedly gentle. The next morning, she stepped into the elevator, praying for an uneventful ride. But as the doors slid shut, a hand reached through at the last second. Sebastian walked in, briefcase in one hand, phone in the other. She froze. He looked up, recognized her, and God help her grin just slightly. "Avoiding me in the hallways today." "I didn't see you," she said too quickly, her voice higher than usual. "You ran into me full speed. I'm not easy to miss," she cringed. "Right, I'm really sorry about that." He glanced at her ID badge. "Gabriella Ormond, new?" "Yeah." "Marketing team," he nodded. "Good department, I'll be watching your work." The doors opened and he stepped out, leaving her paralyzed in place, her heart hammering. From that day on, it was like he was everywhere, in the lobby, passing her desk, at the espresso machine. Always calm, always put together, always looking at her like she was a puzzle he was trying to solve, and she hated how much she wanted him to. 2 weeks later, she was called into a last-minute branding presentation, some luxury real estate launch. Everyone was tense because Sebastian Prescott himself would be attending. She kept her head down as her manager, Dana, spoke until Dana gestured toward her. Gabriella handled the logo and brand color work. All eyes turned to her, including his. Sebastian leaned forward slightly. "You did the gold accent on the E," she nodded, throat dry. "Yes, I thought it gave the brand a more elevated feel without being too flashy." He held her gaze. "It's smart, clean, sophisticated." That was the moment everything shifted. Later that afternoon, he stopped by her desk. "Walk with me," he said. She followed him to the rooftop garden, private, quiet, and breathtakingly beautiful. He leaned against the railing, looking out over Manhattan. "You're talented," he said, "and different." She tilted her head. "Different how? You're not trying to impress me. Most people bend over backward to get on my calendar. You ran into me in a hallway and just apologized like I was a regular guy." "You're not a regular guy," he looked at her then, really looked. "No, I'm not, but I like how you forget that sometimes." She swallowed hard. "Why did you bring me up here?" "I wanted to talk to you without 30 people watching." "About work?" "No," his voice dropped an octave. "About why I can't stop thinking about you." Her heart skipped. "You don't even know me." "I want to," she hesitated. "Sebastian." "You're my boss. Technically, I'm the CEO. You don't report directly to me, and I'm not asking for anything inappropriate. I'm just asking for one dinner." Her brain screamed no, but her heart was already leaning toward him. "One dinner," she said quietly. "That's it," he smiled. "That's all I need." The next night, he picked her up in a black town car and took her to a candlelit rooftop restaurant overlooking the Hudson, the kind of place with no prices on the menu and a pianist playing live in the corner. "You didn't have to go all out," she said as he helped her into her seat. "I did," he said simply, "because you deserve it." They talked for hours about childhood dreams, music, what success really meant. He wasn't just powerful, he was thoughtful, driven, funny in a dry way that caught her off guard, and when he walked her to her door that night, he didn't try to kiss her. Just tucked a strand of hair behind her ear and said, "I'd really like to see you again." She nodded. "Me too." From then on, it was like the world tilted. He sent flowers to her desk, orchids in a crystal vase. He took her to art galleries, jazz clubs, private dinners where the chef came out just for them, but it wasn't just about the luxury. It was the way he listened when she talked. The way he looked at her like she was the only thing in the room that mattered, and Gabriella was falling fast. But just when everything felt perfect, things started to shift. People whispered around the office. Her coworkers stared longer than usual. Someone left an anonymous note on her desk that said, "Sleeping your way up." She crumbled it and threw it away. But the damage was done. She started pulling away, skipping dinners, not replying when he called. Until Sebastian showed up at her apartment one night, unannounced, holding a bag of takeout and a confused look on his face. "Did I do something wrong?" he asked. Gabriella shook her head, eyes shining. It's too much. I didn't sign up for attention. For everyone thinking I'm some gold digger trying to seduce the CEO, he stepped closer. "Gabriella, I don't care what they think." "Well, I do," she snapped. "I have to work here. I'm trying to build a career, not ruin it with a scandal." His jaw tightened. "So I'm a scandal now?" "No," her voice cracked, "but I'm scared." He stared at her for a long moment before setting the bag on the counter. "I'm not." And then he left. She stood there, alone in her kitchen, heart pounding, not knowing if she'd just made the biggest mistake of her life. The third Thursday of the month brought with it a rainstorm thick enough to drown the city's edges in gray. Gabriella stood at the window of the design floor, ignoring the cluttered whiteboards behind her, watching the sharp lines of water streak down the glass. She hadn't heard from Sebastian since that night at her apartment. No calls, no messages, no unexpected rooftop invitations, silence that expanded by the day. "Gabby," Dana's voice broke through the fog, "you're needed in the executive boardroom. Prescott wants you present for the new Paris property pitch." Gabriella turned slowly. "Me," Dana nodded without looking up from her tablet. "Apparently, he requested you by name." Her stomach clenched. She grabbed her tablet, swallowed the storm brewing in her chest, and made her way up. Inside the boardroom, the atmosphere was taut. Executives in tailored suits lined the long table. At the head sat Sebastian, impossibly composed, his expression unreadable. He didn't look at her as she entered. Instead, he tapped a stack of papers and nodded toward a vacant seat. "Let's begin." The presentation moved swiftly. Gabriella stayed silent, taking notes, her eyes fixed on the projection. But halfway through a discussion on European branding trends, Sebastian's gaze flicked to hers, just once, a brief glance sharp as a scalpel. After the meeting, she lingered behind, pretending to collect her things as the room emptied. He remained seated, his hands folded on the table. "Is there something you need clarified?" he asked, his voice even. She breathed in. "I didn't expect you to ask for me. You're the best designer on that team," he replied without hesitation. "I needed you in the room." She stepped closer. "That's it." He looked up at her, jaw tight. "You asked me not to make things difficult. I didn't ask you to disappear. You pushed me away, Gabriella. I respected that. But you didn't ask why." His chair creaked as he leaned back. "You were clear. You're trying to protect your career." "I got the message. I was scared," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He stood, slow and deliberate. "So was I, but I was willing to stay anyway." She opened her mouth, but no words came. He stepped around her, pausing at the door. "Let me know if you have feedback on the Paris proposal." And then he was gone. The rest of the week passed in a blur. She worked late, buried herself in mock-ups and internal revisions, but nothing quieted the ache in her chest. On Saturday, she entered her favorite cafe, desperate for something normal. The bell above the door chimed, and she stepped inside, only to freeze. Sebastian sat in the back corner, alone, with a black coffee and a leather-bound notebook beside him. He looked up as she approached, his expression unreadable. "I didn't come here because of you," she said quickly. "I didn't assume you did," he replied, gesturing to the chair across from him, "but you're welcome to sit." She hesitated only a moment before sliding into the seat. He closed the notebook. You used to come here every Saturday. You notice that? I notice more than you think. She curled her hands around her cup. You've been quiet. You wanted space. I don't want silence. He tilted his head. What do you want, Gabriella? She looked past him out the window where rain still traced patterns on the glass. I want to figure this out without judgment, without whispers, just us. He leaned forward, eyes steady. Then stop running. She looked back at him. I don't know how. I do, he said. Start by letting me take you somewhere tonight, somewhere no one knows us, no expectations, just two people. She hesitated. Where? Trust me. Hours later, she found herself stepping into a converted warehouse in Brooklyn. The walls were lined with paintings abstract, bold, unpredictable. A jazz trio played at the far end beneath a string of exposed bulbs. It wasn't a gala, it wasn't a media-filled launch. It was raw and real. You like art, he said as they walked along the gallery. I love it, she admitted. But I've never seen anything like this, he smiled softly. The artist's a friend. She only shows her work twice a year. I knew you'd appreciate it. As they moved through the space, Gabriella felt something shift. This wasn't the man from the boardroom. This wasn't the billionaire CEO. This was Sebastian, the man who remembered her coffee order, who noticed her Saturday habits, who brought her to a place that had nothing to do with power and everything to do with her. Later, they stood on the rooftop of the gallery, the city spread beneath them like a sea of lights. She turned to him, the wind catching her hair. Why me? She asked. He didn't hesitate. Because you see through everything. The titles, the money, the image, you don't bend for approval, you challenge it. She looked down. That scares people. It attracts me, he said quietly. She met his gaze and for the first time in weeks didn't look away. I'm still figuring out how to be in this, she said. I'm not asking for perfect, he replied. I'm asking for present, she nodded. Then I'm here. He reached for her hand and she let him take it. Neither of them said anything for a long time. The city buzzed below, but in that moment it felt like a world away. Something had changed. Not with fireworks, not with declarations, but with a choice, quiet, intentional, real, and neither of them wanted to run anymore. The next morning, Gabriella stepped into the office not with dread, but with a strange sense of anticipation. The quiet shift between her and Sebastian the night before had left her shaken in the best way. He hadn't tried to dazzle her with luxury. There'd been no flash, no spectacle. Just a space where she could finally breathe beside him. She made it through the morning's meetings with laser focus, but around noon, a courier arrived at her desk with a long, flat box tied in navy silk ribbon. She didn't recognize the handwriting on the tag until she opened it. Inside was a sleek black folio with her initials engraved in silver at the bottom corner. Professional, elegant, and unmistakably custom. Tucked inside was a single card. For your next pitch, I have a feeling it won't be your last. She closed the box slowly, pulse tapping beneath her skin. That afternoon, Dana pulled her into a conference room. You're being assigned to the Milan development project, she said. You impressed some people in the Paris pitch. They want fresh eyes on the Milan branding. You'll be working directly with the executive team. Gabriella blinked. I thought that was months out. It is, but they're accelerating timelines. Dana paused, giving her a look that held more weight than her words. Be ready. By the time Friday rolled around, Gabriella hadn't seen Sebastian all day. She was gathering her things to leave when a voice came from behind her. You always work this late. She turned to find him in the doorway, suit jacket folded over his arm, tie loosened just enough to make him look like he belonged on the cover of a magazine. I could ask you the same thing, she said, smiling faintly. I was in meetings all day. I wanted to catch you before you left. She set her laptop into her bag. What's on your mind? I'm flying to Milan tomorrow. Want to come with me? Her eyebrows shot up. You're serious? He stepped inside the room, letting the door shut behind him. It's work. You're on the Milan project now. You'll need to see the development site. I cleared it with Dana this morning. Gabriella crossed her arms, watching him. You do realize this will only fuel the fire. I know, he said, but I also know you're the right person for this job, and I think you're ready to stop letting other people's assumptions dictate your choices. She searched his face, trying to read the layers beneath his confidence. Just work, he stepped closer. I'm not promising it'll only be that, but I won't cross any lines you don't want crossed, she nodded slowly. Then I'll pack a bag. The next day, the jet was waiting at Teterboro, sleek and understated, no flash, no cameras. Just quiet professionalism and the subtle hum of wealth woven into every surface. As soon as they boarded, an attendant offered coffee, and Gabriella sank into the leather seat across from Sebastian. I've never flown private, she said, taking in the space. Then I'm glad I get to be your first, he said, not looking up from his tablet. She glanced out the window, then back at him. You didn't have to do this. I didn't have to notice you that first day either, he said, but I did. And I'm not interested in pretending otherwise. The flight passed in a blur of strategy documents and aerial views of Lake Como. By the time they landed, the sun was beginning to dip behind the hills, casting the Italian countryside in gold. Their driver took them straight to the villa that housed the Milan development team. The estate was centuries old, its stone walls covered in ivy and its interiors restored with modern elegance. "This is where we're staying?" Gabriella asked as they stepped through grand double doors into a foyer filled with candlelight and the faint scent of citrus. Sebastian nodded. "They keep it for visiting executives. You'll have your own suite." She followed him down a corridor that opened into a room with arched ceilings, a Juliet balcony, and a view of the vineyards that rolled out for miles. "I don't know what to say," she whispered, setting her bag down on the velvet chaise. "Then don't say anything," he leaned against the doorframe. "Just be here." Dinner that night was served on the terrace, fresh Nakai wine from the estate's private cellar and the kind of silence that didn't demand to be filled. As they finished dessert, Gabriella pushed her plate aside. "Why are you really doing all this?" Sebastian tilted his glass in thought. "Because I've built towers and empires, I've bought companies and reshaped cities, but I've never met someone who made me stop and question whether all of that means anything if I'm going home alone." Her breath caught. "That's a heavy thing to put on someone." "I'm not putting it on you," he said quietly. "I'm offering it to you to see what you'll do with it." She reached for her wine, fingers trembling slightly. "I haven't figured out what I want yet," he nodded. "Then let's figure it out here. No distractions, no noise, just the truth." They stood, walking slowly back toward the villa. At her door, he didn't reach for her. He simply looked at her like she had gravity. "Good night, Gabriella." She opened the door, paused, then turned. "Sebastian?" "Yeah, I don't want to be afraid of this." He stepped back, giving her space. "Then don't be." She didn't sleep much that night, not because of nerves, but because something inside her had shifted. The walls she'd spent years building were cracking in places she hadn't expected. And for once, she didn't rush to patch them up. The next day was all business. She spent hours touring the site, reviewing architectural renderings and discussing brand aesthetics with the Italian team. But whenever she turned a corner, Sebastian was there, sometimes watching, sometimes asking questions, always just close enough to remind her she wasn't alone in this. That evening, she found him on the balcony outside the study, overlooking the olive groves. He didn't speak as she approached, just handed her a glass of wine and leaned on the railing beside her. "I saw how you handled the creative team today," he said after a long stretch of silence. "You're better at this than half the people I've got running departments." She shook her head. "I'm still learning, so am I." She looked up at him. "That's hard to believe." He turned to her, and for the first time she saw something raw in his eyes. "You think I don't doubt myself? That I don't wonder every day whether I've traded too much for power? Have you?" "I used to think I hadn't." He inhaled deeply. "But now I'm not so sure." She reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his. For once there was no need to speak. The world below them was still. The night air warm. And for the first time in a long time, neither of them felt like they had to prove anything. They were just two people, standing on a balcony in Milan, learning what it felt like to fall without fear. The Milan mornings were quiet in a way Gabriella hadn't realized. She needed sunlight filtering through gauzy curtains, the scent of espresso drifting up from the kitchen, and the faint clinking of glassware being set for breakfast on the terrace below. It was their last full day in Italy, and the realization sat heavy in her chest like a truth that refused to be ignored. She found Sebastian in the courtyard, seated at a wrought iron table beneath a climbing rose trellis, reading something on his phone with a faint crease in his brow. "You always look like you're planning a takeover," she said as she approached, her voice wry. He looked up and something shifted in his eyes, not surprise, not calculation, but something warmer. "Only when I'm not distracted." She poured herself a cup of coffee, then sat across from him. "What happens after this?" He didn't answer right away. "Do you mean the project or us?" "Both." He set the phone down and leaned forward. "The project will move forward. You'll lead the branding. I want you to take point from New York with full creative control." She blinked. "That's a huge step. You've earned it. And us." His gaze didn't waver. "That depends on whether you're still measuring your future by what people might say or by what you actually want." "I want something real," she said, "but I need to know it's not just a moment. That this isn't a beautiful pause in Milan before we go back to pretending we're just two names on an org chart." He set his hand on the table, palm up. "Then let me show you it's not." That afternoon, instead of heading back into the city for more meetings, he drove her out to the edge of Lake Como. It was a place he said he rarely brought anyone, a private villa tucked against a terraced hillside, weathered stone walls wrapped in wisteria, and a small boat dock at the base. "I bought this place 5 years ago," he said as they walked down to the water. "It was falling apart, no electricity. No plumbing. Everyone told me it wasn't worth the effort. But you kept it," she said. "I restored it, slowly, quietly, not for resale, not for press, just for me. And now you're showing it to me." He nodded. "Because I don't want to keep anything walled off anymore." They sat on the dock as the sun began to dip, the lake catching fire in the reflection. She rested her head on his shoulder, and for a long time neither of them spoke. When they returned to the villa in Milan, there was a message waiting from the team in New York. Prescott Enterprises had just been nominated for a major international design award, and Gabriella's Paris branding project was highlighted in the press release. Sebastian handed her the printed statement, watching her closely. "They used your name first and last, in bold." She read the paragraph twice, then lowered the paper slowly. "This changes everything. It changes the way they see you," he said. "But I already saw it." Later that night, she stood by the fireplace in the study, watching the flames shift. Sebastian entered quietly behind her, something in his hand. "I was going to wait until we got back to New York," he said, "but that doesn't feel right anymore." She turned, and her breath caught. It wasn't a ring, it was a key. "This is for the villa," he said, "the one by the lake. I don't want it to be just mine anymore." She stepped forward, heart thudding. "Are you asking me to live there? I'm asking you to choose me, whatever that looks like, whatever pace you need. But I want you to know you have a place that's yours as much as it is mine. Somewhere no one can question what we are." She curled her fingers around the key. "You're not afraid anymore." "I was never afraid of loving you," he said. "Just afraid you wouldn't let me." She didn't kiss him, not yet. Instead, she took his hand and pressed the key into his palm again. "Then come back to New York with me. Let me show them who I am on my terms. Let me walk into that office as the woman who didn't bend, but still got everything she wanted." He closed his fingers around the key. "Deal." 2 weeks later, they arrived at the Prescott Enterprises gala together. It was a black tie event held in the company's flagship tower ballroom, crystal chandeliers, a string quartet, and every major executive in the city in attendance. Whispers followed them as they entered, some curious, some disapproving, but none of it mattered. Because when the keynote speaker announced the award for international branding excellence, and Gabriella's name was called, the only thing she saw was Sebastian rising to his feet before anyone else, clapping with quiet pride. After the applause died down and the cameras turned elsewhere, he found her in the corner of the ballroom, wine glass in hand and a spark of disbelief still flickering in her eyes. "You were right," she said. "I didn't have to choose between love and ambition." "No," he said. "You just had to stop believing they were at odds." She set her glass down. "I want the villa." He raised a brow. "You do?" "But not just the key," she added, stepping closer. "I want all of it, you, that life, our life." He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Instead, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a second key, This one she recognized instantly, her apartment. "I had it made yesterday," he said. "Just in case." She laughed, soft and disbelieving, and then finally kissed him. There was no storm this time, no hesitation. Just a kiss that felt inevitable, like gravity. Like two people who had collided in a hallway and were never meant to walk away unchanged. Not long after, they left the gala hand in hand, unnoticed by most and completely unconcerned with the rest. Because somewhere between that first crash in the corridor and this night under the city lights, they had become something unshakable, and neither of them had any intention of letting go. The first snowfall of the year dusted Manhattan in white the morning Gabriella handed in her formal resignation. She walked out of Prescott Enterprises' revolving glass doors, coat wrapped tight, face lifted to the cold like it was washing something clean. She hadn't told Sebastian yet, but he'd find out soon. She needed the decision to be hers, unprompted by his influence or anyone else's whispers. The Milan project, now in full swing, was in capable hands. She'd built her name, carved her place, but it was time to create on her own terms. Later that afternoon, she arrived at a quiet brownstone in the West Village, her new workspace. A friend of hers, a retired architect, had offered to lease her the ground floor unit. Rustic hardwood, exposed brick, high ceilings, it was perfect. The sign in the window still read "by appointment only." But inside, she was already drafting concepts for clients who sought her out now, not because of who she once dated, but because of what she could do. As she unpacked her portfolio, her phone buzzed. She didn't need to check the screen. She already knew who it was. "You resigned," Sebastian said the moment she picked up. "Hello to you too." I walked into Dana's office and she handed me your departure letter like it was a resignation from the royal court. I wanted to do it quietly. I noticed. She leaned against the window, watching a snowplow push salt into the street. "I didn't leave for you, I know." "That's why I respect it." He didn't say anything else for a long moment. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "That I thought I couldn't want you more than I already did, but I was wrong." A week later, he showed up at her studio unannounced, but this time he wasn't in a suit. He wore jeans, a cashmere coat, and had a box of pastries in one hand, a flat canvas in the other. "Are you trying to bribe me with almond croissants?" "No, that's just the appetizer." He handed her the canvas. She peeled back the paper and stared. It was a painting of the Lake Como Villa, sunlight on the stone, shadows stretching across the dock, and in the foreground a woman with her back turned, sketching on a pad. "You painted this," she whispered. "I commissioned it. From the artist we saw at the warehouse gallery. I asked her to paint what I see when I think of home." She set the painting down carefully, hands trembling. "I want to split my time between New York and Italy," he said. "I've already arranged the restructuring. I don't need to be in the office every day. The company runs itself when I let it." Her brow furrowed. "You're reorganizing your billion-dollar empire to accommodate me." "No," he said. "I'm adjusting my life because I want to be in it, fully, with you." She stepped forward. "You sure you're ready to let go of that much control?" He brushed her hair behind her ear. "I never had control when it came to you." There was no more hesitation. She kissed him there in the middle of her studio, the scent of paint and snow thick in the air, pastry boxes forgotten on the table. That winter, they traveled to Italy together again, but this time not for business. They hosted friends at the villa, drank wine by the fire, and walked the cobbled streets of nearby villages hand in hand. There was no press release, no Instagram announcement. Just quiet, intentional days strung together like pearls on a thread. In the spring, Gabriella's studio in New York expanded. She hired 2 junior designers and took on an international client. One afternoon, as she reviewed storyboards at her desk, Sebastian walked in with a small velvet box. "Before you panic," he said, holding it out, "it's not what you think." She opened it slowly. Inside was a pendant gold sculpted into the shape of a compass rose. "I know you don't want something traditional right now," he said. "But I wanted to give you something that says I'm always following your direction." She clasped it around her neck. "You're ridiculous, but loyal." Late that summer, they returned to the Milan project for the grand opening of the luxury development. She stood on the rooftop terrace of the flagship property, overlooking the skyline, beside the man who had once been the most untouchable figure in her world and was now the most familiar. "You remember when you told me you couldn't stop thinking about me?" she asked. He nodded. "Still can't. I used to think that was because I was new, a challenge. You were never a challenge," he said. "You were clarity." And that night, under a canopy of stars, he finally asked, not with a ring, not in front of a crowd. Just the two of them, barefoot on cool grass, music drifting from the villa's speakers. "Marry me," she nodded before he even finished the sentence. A year later, they wed in the gardens of the Lake Como villa. Lavender bloomed along the stone walls, and the same artist who had painted the canvas stood nearby, sketching the ceremony in real time. There were only 20 guests, no photographers, no headlines. Their vows were promises whispered like secrets. No one needed to witness them proving anything. They had nothing left to prove. Afterward, they danced under strings of lights. Her dress was simple, his tux undone by midnight, and when the guests finally left, they stayed outside, curled together on a lounge chair, watching the fireflies. "You know," she whispered, "if someone had told me 2 years ago I'd fall in love with a billionaire, I would have laughed in their face. If someone told me I'd give up boardrooms for breakfast in bed and watercolor Sundays, I would have fired them." She turned to him. "Do you miss it?" He kissed her temple. "Not even a little." They stayed there until sunrise, no more running, no more fear, just love, steady as the tide, quiet as the dawn.